Geriatric Mom, episode 11. I'm going to start naming all my episodes, and this is just going to be worst case scenario, is what I'm going to call it. So, I know that, initially I had talked about my experience with postpartum and what that looked like, and the depression, and kind of my journey with that. But I don't think that we delved enough into it to say, the worst case scenarios, right? What can be the worst that happens with postpartum? I Postpartum is obviously defined as being a mother issue, but I truly feel like there's obviously things that men go through with having a newborn and dealing with new things as well. So, I think it's important that we address this for both moms and dads, and that's pretty much in every situation. You can't just include one and exclude the other. So, I had been on YouTube, and I think I was watching stuff about cops, and I'm not even kind of, how you get into these rabbit holes watching videos and whatnot. Well, one that I watched was about a mom who had called 911 and said she was anxious and she needed help and she couldn't take care of her kids. So the officer shows up and she has like a 5 or 6 year old and she has a newborn. And EMS comes and it sounds like they're pretty aware of this lady that she's called before and been super anxious. And she's just explaining to the officers that she's so overwhelmed and that when one kid's crying, another one starts and she doesn't know how to get through that, right? So she's just talking in circles and you can see that she's anxious and she's upset. So they check her out and they check the kids out and the kids are okay. The officer changes the baby's diaper and all of this. So they continue on like that and she pretty much goes on like a voluntary psych hold is what it looks like to me. And the dad was supposed to be like on his way back from work, so they had the kids and he was going to be able to come get them from like the police officers. So he was on his way back, and it sounds like he works at a town a lot and that she's home a lot. And she explains to the officers that they don't really have any friends or family or anyone that can help them. And you can see that she's notably irritated because you can see the neighbors looking over at her. And I think she felt judged and um, probably embarrassed and annoyed all at once. So that's how it ends, and then the next thing you see is another 911 call from the same residence and the same lady outside of her trailer. They say it's a few days later is when they go back, and she's pretty much tells them that she killed her baby, that her baby is not responding, and she should have done more, done something. So they go in, they get the 5 or 6 year old, and he's okay, but he's crying. And then the officer walks up to the little bassinet, and he just starts crying. You can just hear him bawling and just so upset, and the baby's gone. So initially, I just turned it off. So sick to my stomach. I hate stuff like that. I've never understood it. I don't understand how you could hurt kids, no matter how depressed you are or anything. And I was so irritated, and it's just one of those initial reactions where you're like, "Ugh," you know, I want to hurt her. She should be in prison forever. And she does definitely deserve punishment and consequences for her actions. But then, when I was thinking about it, she had been calling, trying to get help. She may not have been presenting things in the right manner, or maybe it just didn't get caught on. But she had been trying to ask for help and tell people, so sorry, that she couldn't um she couldn't do it, that she didn't have the capability and the mental capacity to care for her children. And I don't know what that situation looked like with her spouse, if he just thought, "Oh, she'll get over it," who knows what the situation looked like with the first kid, like, maybe he had been through this with her before and she got better. So who knows really, like, how that situation went, but when I started thinking about that, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that's worst case scenario, right?" Like, this is as bad as it gets with postpartum, is ending with a child's death. And to me, it's like if we can get more information out there and more resources, the better that we can try to help prevent something like that happening again. So, obviously, a lot of people know about the safe haven law. You can take your baby, you have to check the state, but most of the time you can take them to a police station, you can take them to a firehouse, you can take them to a hospital, and that only applies to 72 hours after birth, where you can just leave them and they can't ask any questions. Obviously, I understand that there has to be, regulations with that, but at the same time, maybe if this lady had had that, maybe she would have done that, right? Maybe if she was able to take them to one of those safe places, even though, the baby was a few weeks old and her son was older, that wouldn't have happened because she could drop them off. And I understand that probably, obviously there's positives and negatives to everything, and I'm sure there's lots of reasons why they've done things the way they've done them, and people would maybe just be dumping off their kids and coming back for them. So that most likely is part of it. But that is a resource. And I would say, to be honest with you, even if I ever felt like that and I was in that situation, I wouldn't care how old my kid was. I would still be trying to take them somewhere safe where they were away from me, despite whatever consequences may occur because of that, because it would be better than hurting them. So I think that's something to think about. Those are safe places where you can take your kids if you're feeling like that. Obviously, a great thing is always going to be like therapy and trying to work through those things and talking to your doctor if you have one, so that they can help you get on medications or refer you to the right people to try to get help for that. I was looking up like actual like resources for this and it was a little difficult to find. But Colorado has like multiple programs, and there's like lots of family support programs is what they call them. So one thing that I noticed is if you are having a hard time, calling 211 is a place, and I don't know if this is everywhere, but it's definitely in Colorado, but you call 211 and you kinda explain what's going on to them and how you're feeling and what's going on, and they can direct you to the appropriate resources. Someone that can help you with those things. Also, like she did, calling 911. I wish she had kept calling 911. Called them again, called them again. Maybe something would have happened and what the end scenario that happened wouldn't have happened again. So 911 is a good resource. Call them, they'll send the police, they'll send the fire department, they'll send people to help you if you truly feel like you're going to, hurt yourself or hurt your kids. So that is a resource to use as well. In Colorado, they have some programs where there's like one that's called like Child First. So it's supposed to try to help with like mental health interventions for young children and families to like help them through, any stress or trauma that they might be going through. So that might have been something that would have been helpful for her, to be around other people and to be talking to someone and really trying to work through those overwhelmed feelings that she had. There's another program called Circle of Parents is a national program. So it's supposed to help like parents and caregivers with knowledge. So I think this is very important, and I think that would be a resource that could just help parents in general. Like, maybe I don't know, when the officer went there, the baby wasn't even crying. So of course babies cry. But it's like, was her baby colicky, or was she not understanding, like, his cues that, that they were giving? Was she not producing enough milk? Was she giving him formula? Did he have an upset stomach? Like, trying to really educate parents on those things, because I know firsthand how hard that can be. You're like, "You can't tell me what's wrong." So, I have to try to figure out what's wrong, and that can be very difficult because you're new, they're a new baby, even if you've been around other babies, they're not the same. So, really educating parents on that, and maybe some of the things that she was seeing, or, how she was doing things, maybe they could have helped her with a better routine, and maybe helped her balance with the 5-year-old better, because that is a lot. Two kids, one kid's a lot, two, three, four, so on, lot. That's a lot of stress, and it is a lot of work. Then there's a program for fatherhood too. So this one will help anyone that's 18 and older. And it actually, some of these are pretty cool because it'll help the parents work with their kids up until they're like 24 years old. So say you've had, a difficult relationship or something, and you haven't been able to be involved in your kid's life, like they'll help that. And this is a program targeted at dads, which I think that a lot of times we do lack that need, that fathers also have struggles, and that they need support as well, that it's not just the mom, the dads are involved as well. Then there's some other resources on here. Just like more, there's the family resource centers. So this is another one where you can that you can call numbers and stuff, and they'll help you get connected with certain centers that will help provide support and programs. Maybe that mom would have benefited from, her kids being at daycare 1 or 2 days a week. So she could have done some self care, or just taken a nap, especially since it sounded like the father worked out of town a lot. And so she was like the sole one providing for them. Maybe she just needed a minute to just maybe sleep, you know? So I think that utilizing resources like that would be huge, and just to not feel alone. There are classes on here about how to care for young children. Like I was just saying, you don't know what you're doing in the beginning. So this is all too, by the way, just on the Colorado website. I just generally did it for Colorado, obviously, because that's where we are. But I'm guessing a lot of counties and other states have similar resources, hopefully. So there's ones about how to take care of kids and ways of coping with that, and milestones that they should be meeting. There's another one called Healthy Families, that just help support the families in general. Um, like a lot of these are like volunteer based, so it's people that are just volunteering their time, so they're free, so it wouldn't be of any cost, because that can definitely be an issue as well for, families and stuff too, is cost. So a lot of these are free, no charge, they'll provide you with the resources. A lot of these respect, cultural differences, and respect those boundaries, which can be super important. There's other ones on here about, how to help preschoolers. Um, the other ones about how to connect parents with doctors, which, maybe she didn't have a primary doctor, and sometimes it can be hard to get back into your OB. So I feel like having that trusted relationship, and once again, really pushing that agenda that, everybody have a primary care doctor and really be doing those follow-ups, I think is insanely important. And I think that you really need to trust the provider that you're seeing so that you can tell them everything and not feel judged or crazy or whatever the case may be, but really finding that person that's going to listen and take that time for you. So that's a huge one. There's Nurturing Parents and Nurturing Fathers program. There's Parents as Teachers. So that one would be more of like a homeschooling thing, which that's probably not what she needed. There is Safe Care Colorado, which it sounds like that one would be a really good resource for her, and that it could have been a good resource for her is more people that are volunteering just to help out and support new families and families that are struggling. That probably would have been a huge help for her, is just having someone to be there and maybe listen to her. And I don't want anyone to think that during this podcast that I'm defending what she did, because what she did was horrible and she will face, the consequences of what she did. But I just think it brings to light how awful postpartum can be. And really, that's the whole point of starting this podcast and discussing this. And yes, I do, try to post fun things on Facebook and TikTok and all of that. But in reality, this podcast is to give the honest truth and to share your stories and to share my stories and to make others not feel alone and hopefully avoid, some of these things that are happening. And I think as a society, we like to try to not think about these things. I know I am guilty of that 100%. I don't want to think that a parent could ever hurt their kid or even imagine doing something like that. But that is the reality of the world and things that do happen. And so it's how do we try to do the best we can to provide these resources to prevent that from happening. So, like I said, all of these programs are on just the Colorado website. It's literally called Family Support Programs. And so that would be a huge thing, for you to look up in your area to see what is available to you. Like I said, I'm not sure if the 211 number works for everywhere, but if it does, that's great because they literally will just direct you to where you need to go. They will give you the phone numbers for the services you need. So with this, I think that just talking about this is important for dads too, if they're feeling overwhelmed, if like Chris and I, we both 50-50 take care of Odin, right? So I think that we have this open communication where we're able to talk about, oh, we had a really bad day, or we had this, or this was overwhelming, or this was that. And we kind of just talk it through. And sometimes you just need someone to listen. Never during this postpartum have I felt like hurting Odin. Um, you know, myself was different. I never like thought about like killing myself, but I definitely wanted to like remove myself from the situation sometimes because I felt like, he was crying because of me and I wasn't doing things right and blah blah blah. But I think fully understanding the whole spectrum of postpartum does include like these horrible things that do happen sometimes. So looking for those resources, right? If you do have those families, those friends, really relying on them to discuss with, huge. Calling the 211 number, huge. They will direct you to the resources. I'd say, no matter what, if you're feeling like that, keep calling 911. I definitely think that when she was doing that, she was literally crying out for help. And it's unfortunate that that help didn't I don't know if it was, she didn't get the resources she needed, or, that follow through wasn't there on her end. I'm not sure. Like I said, I shut it off and couldn't even really process that situation after that. So calling 911, keep calling them, instead of hurting your kid. If you're frustrated, if you're upset, if you're mad, if you're sad, whatever the case may be, oh well, call 911 so that you don't do anything that you're going to regret, or that, you know, causes your kid distress in life too. Then the next thing I feel like is, yes, there is that safe haven law, but if you truly feel like you're going to endanger your kids, I would take them. Take them to that police station, take them to that firehouse, take them to the hospital. You know, CPS will get involved and they will most likely remove them, but I feel like that's better than the alternative, right? Then we can look at this from an aspect of adoption as well. So you can give up your rights of to your children and they can be adopted out. The bad part with that is a lot of kids that are older usually end up getting stuck in the foster care system, which is another discussion too. But that can be hard too, right? So, if they're younger kids, I feel like you see that generally they get adopted out quicker, especially babies. There's, you know, millions of people waiting to adopt babies and to have that opportunity. So, maybe the baby would have gotten adopted quicker than the little boy. I don't know. But adoption is a route too, maybe she wasn't ready to be a mom and it was kind of she had the kid, so you have to be a parent at that point. But it's like, what are your alternatives when you're feeling like that? Which I definitely the way this one played out was terrible. So I think that postpartum kind of comes in stages too, right? Like you get the initial baby blues right off the bat. I pretty much got them a few days after having Odin, and that didn't feel so severe to me as actually having postpartum depression, right? So the first few days, I feel like it was just like all hormones. I was like really cry and um, just trying to adjust to being a mom, and Chris going back to work, and just a little bit overwhelmed, but not like this overwhelming feeling of I need to leave, right? And then that kind of regulated out within the first few weeks, and I felt pretty good for a little bit, and then it turned into me getting more anxious, and I was really hyper focused on Chris dying. Why? I don't know. But I was so scared that he was gonna die and I was gonna be alone with Odin, and I would literally get so upset about it, and I started just obsessing about life and death and what that was gonna look like, and if he died, what were we gonna do, and I wasn't gonna be enough for Odin, and it was just this, like, ripple effect, and that just kinda continued on from there. Then everything just kept getting worse. Then I'd, you know, cry when he was gone and when Odin was sleeping because I didn't want Odin to see me crying and I didn't want Chris to see me crying. So I just like cry by myself and in the shower, and that just like continued on and kept getting worse until there was a point when I'm like, they would just be better if I wasn't here. Like I need to go. And then I was like, oh, this isn't right. Like that's not what Chris would want. That's not good for Odin. Like I am his mom. So I was able to reach out to my provider. So if you have a good relationship with your doctor, that's great. Obviously, you can reach out to your OB too. Sometimes you have a better connection with them. You did just go through, 10 months with them to birth this newborn. And so you can establish like a good relationship, I feel like, with them. But for me, my relationship was better with my primary, and I felt more comfortable talking to her about everything. So really relying on, that support. And if you call a doctor's office and tell them how you're feeling and what's going on, most of the time they're going to tell you to come in right away and try to give you that support and help you with what you need, right? And I that is part of the reason why they do what they do. I know when I was in the hospital, they had me take like a quiz right after I had Odin, like how I was feeling emotionally. And at that time I was on cloud nine. I just had him, my hormones weren't struggling yet. I was just super happy that I was alive and I had my baby, and so that test to me didn't really do anything. They do kind of like someone come in, at least in Colorado at UC Health, they did have someone come in and talk to you, about if you felt like you had enough support and resources that they had offered. Like if you need help, you could reach out to them and talk to a counselor or a therapist. And so they do give you resources, at least in the hospital, to like reach out and notify. And I don't know if that was the similar situation for this girl, if she was provided those resources, but those are also something to look into too. Or even just going to the hospital and be like, I can't do this, help me. They have social workers, they have case managers, they have people that can help you find those resources so that you can take care of your kids and be the best you for them. So I do know that they did that. And then, when I went in for my OB appointments, they also have you take a test. And I feel like they're not like super accurate and they didn't really relay how I was feeling. So I do understand the purpose of them and I do think that they're important, but they didn't really relate to how I was feeling. So that it was hard to answer those questions, and I'm pretty honest, so I answered them, honestly, but I just feel like maybe different questions might be helpful, and obviously you don't want to make them too long because then people probably won't answer them, but maybe reevaluating those. But that is the purpose of them doing those when you go in, is so that they can see where you're at mentally. So telling them if you're struggling, I think, is huge. I did tell my OB right afterwards that, I was struggling with everything and how it had happened. And, she obviously said reach out anytime and she would help and refer me to a therapist or a support group or whatever. But I was really struggling with the fact of having a C section and just how everything went. It was really hard to process. So I think relying on that. And then, even when I took Odin in, Chris and I take Odin in for his appointments, they have you fill out another similar questionnaire. So I feel like if you were honest with that doctor, like if you didn't have your own doctor or whatever the case may be, they could also, help with that. And I do see like the layers of where they're trying to, break this and try to prevent bad things like this from happening. I just think sometimes like the pieces don't always line up correctly. And wherever this was, I don't know what state it was, I don't know what city it was in, etc. So what kind of resources does it look like for them? But I do feel like within like UC Health and stuff, they do have a lot of, barriers to try to prevent something horrific like this from happening. So I guess the point of this podcast is to reach out to everyone and, new moms, new dads, soon to be, whatever the case may be, current, that if you start feeling like this, you can reach out. You can reach out to anyone to try to support you. I'm here, to listen, to support. I can't always do things to help, but I'm always open to listening and trying to help and always willing to try to find a resource for somebody. If somebody reaches out to me needing help and they are saying they want help, I will literally do everything I can to try to find you those resources. But you have to be the one that follows through with that, right? So reach out to your friends, reach out to your family, call that 211 number, call 911, take your kids to the hospital, do whatever you can to avoid that situation if you feel like that. If you ever feel like hurting your kids, step away, try to get help, you know, just do what you can to try to remove yourself from that situation so that you can improve and your life for your kids will improve too. Really think it's important that we try to break this as much as possible and prevent anything like this from happening again. So, obviously, once again, this was definitely a harder episode. It was definitely very emotional for me. I literally hate when kids are hurt, and I know a lot of you obviously feel the same way. So, I think looking at the bigger picture and trying to figure out how to fix that is very important. So, once again, thank you for listening to Geriatric Mom. This is episode 11, worst case scenario. And this is all about, real moms and dads telling the unedited truth and sharing our experiences so that we know that we're in this together. I think that if you need anything at all, just reach out. I am personally on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and I have my own website, www.geriatricmom.com. Obviously, there's a contact form on there, so just reach out. It goes to my email. Always happy to try to chat with somebody and kind of talk through these things. So, obviously, not a professional, but I will always try to help you do whatever is best that you need to be done for you and your family. Thanks for listening.